Hey everyone, welcome back to And Now for something a little bit different. Tonight we're going to be talking about I guess you want to say like a revenge vigilante movie from 2010 called Boy Wonder. Written, directed, produced by Michael Morrisey. This movie it was really something to watch. And the basic premise of this movie is a young boy's traumatized watching something no child should ever watch happen before his eyes. And it tells a story of how he deals with it, doesn't deal with it as he grows up. What happens when that trauma is left unresolved, untreated, I guess you could say, from a clinical point of view. But it was a really interesting watch. Now, over the years, we've had several movies come out, that deal with that revenge vigilanteism plot, subplot. Some of the better ones that we know about: Death Wish with good old Charles Bronson, um, A Man on Fire with Denzel Washington again with The Equalizer, Brandon Lee with The Crow, even though that's kind of like a metaphysical little bit of vigilanteism, it still fits in it. And one of the ones that most recently, John Wick. I mean, you want to talk about getting justice for a dead puppy? John Wick. There you go. One of my favorites of all time. When you sit back and look at it, right? Is it really, a vengeance film, a vigilante film, or is it just a man who's just done with everyday crap? And that movie is Falling Down with Michael Douglas. I think the closest movie that could somewhat compare to this movie, Boy Wonder, would be with Joaquin Phoenix's movie, You Were Never Here, right? That one kind of plays in parallel to some of the stories and the way it's plotted out uh, in that movie and Boy Wonder. But, we'll get there. All right, it's been a little while since we kind of talked about, or what I've talked about in terms of what I've been up to, what I've seen recently. Well, if you've been following along, which I appreciate you. If you have been, been to Baltimore Comic Con, went to a cabin in the woods, um, just enjoying life as best we can, as best as anybody can, really. But recently we've been, I don't know, it's kind of like an interesting, conversation to have, right? Are streaming movies made for TV movies because that's where we're watching it, or a mobile device? It doesn't matter. So anyway, recently we've checked out, my wife and I, the movie A House of Dynamite, starring Rebecca Ferguson and Idris Elba. That movie was The basic premise of that movie is what happens when an attack on the homeland occurs, and the various aspects, from the workers who have to um, formulate a plan or oversee, the steps required to intercept and defend the homeland, to the soldiers and what they have to go through, down to the staff members, right? Those high level folks who, until recently, have not been getting paid by the government. Stupid, stupid thing happening. However, oh, and then of course the president of the United States, president of the United States, portrayed by Idris Elba. He's I love him. I love him as an actor. Man, I just like watching him. Period. Rebecca Ferguson plays a high level analyst who she provides the human element to what some of these folks may have to endure. And the crazy part is, this is something that, many of us will never know about, right? Because it's all behind the scenes. We're not meant to be exposed to it, in the sense of society just like losing its ever loving mind if something, quote unquote catastrophic were to be on the horizon. However, that movie, A House of Dynamite, really does make you think. It really does open up questions. As an example, the wife and I were simply going, what do you do in that situation, right? Is it the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one, to quote certain Vulcan? Y'all know who I'm talking about. Or do you basically play the game of wait and see? Okay, the other thing the wife and I have been catching up on, we caught up on season 3 of Dark Winds. Came out in 2022 to 2023, or no, 2025 now, right? Because season 3 just dropped. And they've already got a green light to do a season 4. Dark Winds, starring Zon McClarnon, is a show about a tribal police officer who has to deal with some crazy stuff, right? Not only for a tribal institute, not a tribal institute is the wrong word, right? Being an Indian reservation police officer, having to deal with, quote, the outside world, right? Which is the government and all that good stuff, to things that happen on the reservation. And it's a really great show. I love Zon McClarnon. If you haven't, or you don't recognize the name, he kind of really became popular with the show Longmire. He was also in the movie Doctor Sleep. He was also in the movie Bone Tomahawk. Man, he's a great actor. He is also of Indian heritage. I believe it's Lakota. So he does well. He does well in front of the camera. I really like him. I really like him. I hope he continues on quite a while. Cause Dark Wind. All right, so that's kind of what I've been up to. Hey, what have y'all been up to? Just drop a comment. Let us know what you got going on. Love to hear from you. So let's go ahead and get into Boy Wonder behind the camera. Let's talk about the folks who brought this film to life. As I mentioned earlier, Michael Morrisey is the writer, producer, and director of Boy Wonder. Came out in 2010. This was his directorial debut. Now, he's been in the entertainment industry, but it's quite interesting, kind of his background, kind of his start, in the sense that a lot of the work that he's done was primarily TV shows. And TV shows about renovations, home renovations, homeowner stuff as like, what you get for your money, or gosh, hot mess house, I think it is. But it's and number one, I love those shows. I love watching, even though there's nothing new. But what's the show? This Old House. I love it. I love to learn things, right? Because you gotta be a little self-sufficient. And for those of you who know what I'm talking about, there's a phrase: the joys of home ownership. Some of the other movies that I could find that he's done was The Girl Who Got Away, and he's got one coming up called Girl Stolen, I believe it is. It's in pre-production. I believe it's another one of those somewhat like Taken type backgrounds, from what I understand. Okay, now this one's really interesting. Now we're talking about cinematography, the cinematographer. We're talking about Michael Levasseur. This guy's been in the industry for quite a while, and I didn't realize until I dug into this movie a little bit just some of the great things that he's done. He's done a lot of shorts, he's done movies, he's done TV. One movie that he did back in 2007, I believe it was with Rosario Dawson, Decent. 2007's Decent with Rosario Dawson, which kind of lends a little bit of its own storyline in parallel to Boy Wonder, right? Which is about, getting revenge for being wronged. One of the other shows that he's done, Warrior Nun. Wife and I tried to watch it. Well, we did watch it, right? I think it had 2 seasons, and it was okay. I don't know if they've ever finished it out, because it kind of left, I think season 2 kind of got left on a cliffhanger. Other shows that he's done: Power, Book 3, for those who are following that series. And here's the exciting. This is why I was a little bit excited to know that he was working on this. Watching Boy Wonder, some of the framing, some of the shots, some of the I guess you could say the LUTs, the colors used, the style of capturing, the people, their interactions, their actions. The fight scenes in Boy Wonder looked kind of familiar, but I couldn't place it until I started digging into this. Michael Lavasseur was the cinematographer on, back then, it was Netflix's Daredevil season 1. If you've seen that, then you kind of you should definitely watch Boy Wonder, because you're going to see some parallels with how Daredevil season 1 was shot to how Boy Wonder was shot. For the editors on this movie, we have Doug Fitch and Ray Hubley. Roy Hubley himself has worked on some pretty big name films. You ever heard of The Untouchables? 1987. And he's also worked on another movie starring a certain Michael Caine, Dressed to Kill. That was a fantastic movie. And another Al Pacino movie, Carlito's Way. So we have a lot of experience, right? And it was interesting, and I'll get to it later, but the editing on this movie, it works on many levels, and then it doesn't work on other levels within this movie. And I'll explain later so it makes sense. Circling back to Michael Morrisey, Boy Wonder was an independent film, and it was, again, as Michael Morrisey being one of the producers, it was his own house, right? Boy Wonder Productions that put this out. So we're talking about a movie that you may have heard of. Most likely you haven't, because I didn't until I just happened to be, kind of, what the hell am I going to watch, and finding it. But Boy Wonder has a quality and a feel to it that says, you know what? Why didn't I watch this earlier? So, neither here nor there. Now that we've talked a little bit, now that we've talked about those behind the camera, let's go to those who are in front of the camera. Now, some of the names, again, being an independent film, you probably haven't heard of, or you have heard of but can't quite place them. And that was kind of one of the things that I found in researching this movie, was that the actors and actresses in this movie, for an independent film, gosh, it's great to see the quality, the fleshing, and the characters that they bring to life on screen. And they did a really great job with this. Starting first and foremost with our anti-hero, we have Caleb Steinmeyer, who plays the character Sean. Sean, as a character, is the young boy who's he's gone through some stuff. But some of his earlier credits include one of the more famous shows that hit the airwaves, Lost, and True Blood. True Blood I never watched. The wife has. I couldn't find anything beyond Boy Wonder. Caleb Steinmeyer kind of vanished. I'm not sure what happened to him. All I know is he did an amazing job in this movie. I wish him the best. Hopefully he's doing well. Next we have Zunay Henao, who plays Detective Teresa. Now, she's been in a lot of TV shows, some movies, primarily TV, to which I want to say some of her more famous shows were if Loving You Was Wrong. I've heard of that show. Love Thy Neighbor. You kind of get where I'm going with this, right? It's one of those the love interests in the relationships. And yes, you can guess that if she was in those, yes, she does. She's a cutie. She is a cutie. Forgive me for saying so, but she is. Next up is Bill Sage. He plays Terry, who is Sean's father. Like others, he's done a lot of TV, some movies. However, going back on his filmography, I guess you could say he's a one episode type actor. He shows up in a lot of shows. I'm not going to list them all. However, for this production, he really delivers something that I guess you could say stirs some emotional conflict as a viewer. And we'll get to that as we go through the synopsis. Next up, we have Chuck Cooper, who plays Chief Detective Bill, whose character in this movie is kind of like a protector, an overseer of Sean. And he's been around for quite a while. I believe since 1965. He's done a lot of TV shows. One of his more famous ones, I believe, was 100 Center Lane, Bold and the Beautiful, for you soap opera romantics out there who watch that. He plays a detective on that show. And he's also appeared in the show Power. And then rounding it off is Daniel Stewart Stevenson. He plays Detective Gary, who is Teresa's partner in this movie. He's kind of, oh gosh, I want to say he plays the realist type of cop, right? Yeah, we got some things to go and do. However, a lot of times with this job, perception is reality, that type of character, right? And he's been around for a little while. Again, lots of TV, some movies. Uh, one of the shows that he's definitely come up on, and one of my favorites of Justified, Timothy Oliphant, um, People of the Earth. I started watching that a long time ago, but I have to get back to it because I kind of I forgot why I just stopped watching. Something came up. Lodge 49, 48, 49. I believe that was a comedy show. And his one of the bigger movies that he did appear in was The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 with John Travolta and yeah, Denzel. Denzel's just awesome. So we've talked about the cast and the crew. Let's go ahead and start diving into 2010's Boy Wonder. The movie opens up with a young boy talking with his mother on a park bench, and it's a nice little conversation. I'm not sure if he really understood because she's asking him questions about Bach. Then it transitions into an older Sean, jogging. Looks like he's getting his morning exercise routine. And then it transitions once more. He's sitting on the school steps. It looks like he's still in high school, and from what we gather, he is a senior that year. However, when he's sitting on the school steps, he's watching this I guess you could say freshman getting bullied by one of his fellow seniors, and he's not too keen on what he just witnessed. Cuts over. Sean is staring out the window, and then the teacher finally calls the classroom to order. He takes a seat next to his friend Steve, and then Steve bums a pen off of him. Typical high school, right? Hey, you got a pen? I need a pencil. Oh, you got any paper? We've all been through that. But Steve's talking to him about a party at this young lady's house. I believe her name was Amanda. This coming weekend, and they should go. He doesn't do anything. You should get up and go. Then we see Sean riding a subway, and I'm kind of guessing from it, which I was proven correct in my guess when I was watching it was, and this was a first time watch for me, was that this was in New York City because he's riding the subway, and on the subway is a gentleman who does seem to have some mental health issues, appears homeless, very belligerent, very confrontational to several riders on this subway, and Sean's just staring at him, gauging him. Then what we see is the next morning he's there having breakfast. He's talking with his dad, Terry. They cut to a scene where Terry is walking in the rain, carrying flowers to a gravesite, and the presumption is it's for his wife, Sean's now past mother, and he's talking, holding a conversation, and just asking to keep looking out for him and Sean. What we see next is on the subway, Sean is back riding. However, something's going on with Sean, right? He starts having like flashbacks. Visual storytelling is he's observing a man with obvious mental health issues. He's having some issues himself, but it's not quite to that degree. The movie continues on, and what we end up seeing is that night, a drug addict, young lady, is pleading with a drug dealer to hook her up, And the sad part is she's got like her kid there. They send her on her way, and then Sean shows up, and he's been watching this whole time. Drug dealers noticing him start, really approaching him, right? And start, showing that little bully attitude, and slapping him upside the head like, you got any money for me? What you looking at? What you doing? And next thing you know, fight breaks out. He takes on two of them, and this is where I was talking about how, Levasseurs cinematography comes into play, because the way it was shot, the style of it, very, very Daredevil like. Sean ends up, taking one of the dealer's knees out, putting another one in a leg lock and dropping him down to the ground. But the drug dealer that he, took the knee out on ends up pulling a gun on Sean. Sean wrestles it away, is pointing it at the drug dealer. They're like, oh, chill, man, chill, chill. And then when Sean gets distracted, the primary drug dealer number one tries to take the gun from him, and then the screen goes blank, and you hear a gunshot. The next scene shows Detective Teresa in her car on the phone. She's having an argument. You can probably guess it's, either an ex-boyfriend, ex-husband. Spoiler, it was an ex-husband. So she's arguing on the phone with him as she's getting out of the car and walking to court. And she walks into the courtroom and sees there's a defendant whose name is Larry. And they have some banter back and forth, and Larry kind of delivers a veiled threat to Teresa, Detective Teresa. What we see then in the courtroom is that the prosecutor apparently asked for a continuance, to which the judge agreed. So instead of the defendant, Larry, going to trial and starting to face justice that day, which is why she showed up, it's delayed for like another 4 or 5 months. It's like, why? So after that courtroom scene, what we see next is Detective Teresa and Detective Gary, talking. He's walking, welcoming her to the homicide squad. And as they cross over, then you see a camera pan and you see Sean walking with another police officer, and they're talking about boxers, more specifically Muhammad Ali and how great he was, but he couldn't touch, this one boxer. To which, Sean's like, oh, you're crazy. They eventually, get to a point where Sean is at a computer, and Chief Detective Bill comes over and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And then he notices that Sean's got somewhat of a shiner up on his left eye. Bill's like, "Hey, what's going on? What happened?" And Sean's like, it's nothing happened really. I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't figure it out." But he's basically lying to Bill. Again, you had that crossing between Detective Gary and Teresa, and then Sean and the other police officer, and kind of like ships passing in the sea, in the ocean at night. But they do eventually meet, because Teresa's asking Gary's like, "Hey, who's that kid over there?" Gary's like giving her a hard time, like explains kind of the background that, oh, that's Sean. His mother had her head blown off about 10 years ago. So eventually that night, she finally works up the courage, because she thinks somebody who shouldn't be there is like ransacking the office, but she sees it's Sean at the printer, and she little idle chit chat, and then Sean's like, "Okay, well, nice meeting you. I gotta go." But what she finds that on the printer, he was printing out something on the topic of triceleron, which it's not real neurotoxin, basically. Then it kind of transitions as she's leaving the office, right? She notices she has a flat tire. She starts trying to change her tire, but a car almost clips her. Freaking New York drivers, right? Well, Sean was observing her, which is kind of weird, but he comes over, offers to help, and then they start somehow talking about Larry. Now, again, when you start listening to some of the dialogue, and it wasn't until my second watch did it really start showing out, right? Those ley lines on the map, right? Those 6 degrees of separation were really starting to form. Apparently, Teresa is the one who arrested Larry. Larry apparently may have a connection to Sean and his mother's and his father. So as the movie continues on, right, Sean's, walking around or he's on a subway. Sean's starting to have more flashbacks. However, this is where it gets rough, right? It's not so much about the trauma he witnessed with his mom. It's now the trauma he witnessed between his mom and dad. Apparently, what we learn as a kid, Sean unfortunately had to witness his father apparently abuse his mom. He was a alcoholic, a drunk, physical abuser, really roughing up his mom, and apparently roughed him up too on occasion. But it's one of those things that it starts now showing as the movie progresses through different cut scenes, present to the past, that you start piecing a little bit about Sean's life and what he's starting to have to deal with. As the movie progresses, what we see then is a piece of shit pimp manhandling one of his ladies, a young prostitute, and as he's about to really put the hurt on her, what we see then is Sean's just standing there watching and finally calls out his name, to which the pimp's name was Joe, I believe it was, but he doesn't take kind to him sticking his nose in his business, so he starts a fight, goes in, knocks Sean around, goes to the trunk of his car, pulls out an aluminum bat, gets a couple shots in, but Sean has one of those collapsible batons, like the police use, you flick and extends a little baton, and he starts gaining the upper hand. He finally puts Joe down, and then Joe finally gets up and starts walking. He's like, you know what? This is all your fault, yelling at his lady. And then, comes around and says, you know what? You come back around here again and you stick your nose back in my business, I'll put a bullet in your head. And starts to turn. Big mistake. Turns, starts walking back up the steps. Sean calls out to him, and Joe turns around. Next thing you know, Sean's holding that gun. This is the gun he took from that drug dealer from earlier in the movie. And then next thing you know, pop. He's now 2 for 2, right? He crossed a line to which, as he's trying to, I guess you could say, enact justice. There's just certain lines you don't cross, right? But he's crossed it twice now, so it's kind of dark, and that's where the movie, the color schemes I mentioned earlier, lets the darkness of the film really starts lending itself to those scenes where Sean is actively, I guess, doing his acts of vigilanteism. He's not Batman, that's for sure. He's definitely starting to trend more like Daredevil and Punisher, kind of like rolled up in one. Now the movie progresses on, and what we see is, Teresa, runs into Sean again, and during the day, and he's like, "Hey, you know what? Let's go grab some lunch and talk." And she's talking, and he's an observant fellow. He's a smart kid, right? Very observant of people and his surroundings, and picks up on that. She has an unhappy look about her, so she must be divorced or broken up with her boyfriend. To which he's basically right. They walk into this Chinese restaurant, and there's kind of like a kerfuffle going on between a customer about, vegetables in his lo mein when I said no vegetables. And they're yelling back at him, no, vegetable lo mein is vegetables. Teresa orders 2 egg rolls. The attendant doesn't apparently, pay her no mind, right? So she's like, hey, excuse me, bang, 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 2 egg rolls. And then he starts yelling in Chinese, and they do the subtitles. And he's just being really nasty, hey, why don't you get this pushy bitch 2 egg rolls? And the cook apparently is his wife, the attendant's wife, and, gets the egg rolls, hands them to Teresa, and just calls her an ugly, ugly bitch in Chinese. And Teresa pays for it, right? She doesn't know what's going on, and it kind of happens in the real world. Sean says, hold up, as they start walking. He's like, hold up. And he says, look, you better learn how to talk nice to people. You shouldn't be speaking to people like that. You know what? I have it in my right mind to come back and put a bullet into your head and your fucking ugly wife's head. And the look on this attendant's face is like, ooh. So later on, there's I guess, a retirement party for Chief Detective Bill. Apparently, he's leaving. So Teresa's there with Gary, of course, and they're doing some shots, having some beers, and Gary's, hey, you know, is there anything you're not telling me? What's going on? Are you holding anything back? We're supposed to be partners. They have this dialogue back and forth, and they finally, get to the point where he acknowledges, you know what, you're right, I am drunk, but I can't promise you I'm going to be better later because I'm still going to be drunk. It's interesting, some of the dialogue there. But Teresa, she goes up to Chief Detective Bill, right? And, wants wish him happy retirement, to which Bill kind of lets her know, hey, no, no, this is not my party. This is your party. She's kind of confused. He lets her know, look, I know you taking an interest into Sean. So let me save you a lot of time and effort, right? Leave him the frick alone. Just leave him alone. I'm here till Friday. When I leave, he'll leave. You don't understand what that boy's been through. You can't even begin to start to understand what's going on in his head. So don't even try. Leave him alone. Catches Teresa off guard, right? It's like, whoa, what the hell is going on here, right? Which causes her to rethink some things. But anyway, her and Gary leave the retirement party, and he's like, I hope you're taking the train. Of course, Gary's like, of course I'm taking the train. I'm drunk, not stupid. So on this subway train, it is, and this is where, and I'll dive into it a little bit more, where the editing kind of throws you off a little bit, right? Because Teresa and Gary do get on the train. There's a couple other transit policemen on the train as well. Next, this Chinese mother with her two kids come in. And he's like, "Hey, they're fighting back there. Go take a look." And then it kind of flashes back to just a few minutes ago, in the quote past, where we find Sean is sitting a couple cars back from where Teresa and Gary were with the other transit cops. Sean's been observing the homeless man we saw earlier in the movie, and he's getting really belligerent, really nasty, saying some really, disgusting stuff to this nice young lady. And then he turns his ire to the Chinese family, and then turns his ire back to the girl. And then Sean's been witnessing this, and I guess he's been planning it, because next thing you know, he pulls out. I guess you want to say black camo paint. Army soldiers used to put it on, right, to help blend the tone of their skin to break it up. So he takes this black face paint, and he just takes it and he just draws it down his face, right? It's really actually kind of crazy looking. Then he leans over to the young Chinese boy, speaks to him in Chinese, and basically, even though it's not translated or not captioned on the screen, you get the gist of what Sean's doing. He's like, hey, get your mom and your sister, get to safety. Then next thing you know, you see him take out of his pockets two sets of brass knuckles, and he approaches this homeless guy. And then next thing you know, Sean's just starting to he just starts wailing on this guy. It's bad on one respect, in that he is stopping this guy from harassing and haranguing this young lady. However, there could be an alternative to brass knuckles, because what we see then is, even though the guy is finally, crying and stating, I give up, I'm stopping, please stop, please stop, Sean does not stop. He continues pounding on this guys with those knuckles. And if you've seen anywhere anything close to what brass knuckles can do to a person's face, you can kind of guess that guy was not having a good night. Then it kind of flashes back again towards the present, back to where the mom enters the car with Teresa and Gary and the transit cops. It's like they're fighting. They enter into the car. They see, Sean like basically kneeling over the guy, getting ready to give him one more blow. And they, next thing you know, he gets up and he runs out of the car because they just pulled into a station. Teresa gives chase, and Sean gets away. Even though he got away, Sean comes home that night, and then again, this is where it's kind of wild how the movie goes back, because next you know he's having um, hallucinations, delusions, where Teresa caught up to him at his house and is like, "Get down." But then it's his father, and it's his father back in the old days where he's being, very loud and obnoxious and abusive to him, yelling at him. And then you come to find out neither of them were there, right? It's kind of like all in his head. So you're really starting to see in this movie as they go through just a lot of the stuff, the mental anguish that he's going through, that he can't keep a clear head. It's pretty wild. The next morning, Terry's like, "Hey, come on, Sean, let's go." And next thing you know, we see, Terry basically takes his son out to breakfast, right? And they're having a nice breakfast, and apparently they were in their own neighborhood, stop in a diner, and then one of the waitresses comes back and is like, "Rock, is that you?" And then, apparently they knew each other, right? And, his father excuses himself to go to the restroom. Waitress is like, Sean says, "I heard you call him Rock. What's going on?" It's like, "Oh, your dad was pretty famous. He was a hell of a boxer, but he got a lot of, I guess you could say, ring time in the streets." I mean, and that's what they called him. They called him Rocky, a famous boxer. So he learned something that he never knew about his dad. Dad comes back. He's like, "Hey, it was great seeing you, but, me and my son, we got to go." And then what we see is Terry taking Sean back to the scene of his pain, back to the scene of his trauma. They're basically on the same street in the same neighborhood where his mother was murdered, and Sean's starting to lose his cool and yelling at his dad. And Terry acknowledges he's done wrong by his mom, by his son, by his whole family. And he's trying to make some amends. And he wants to make those amends, but he tells Sean, "I can't do that without you. I can't do that without you giving me a chance, without some forgiveness." And they embrace, right? So there's like a moment of, man, maybe there's going to be some good out of this. The movie cuts over, and apparently Friday has come and gone, because we see Bill packing up things at his house into his car and stuff. And Teresa shows up, and Bill's not taking too kindly to Teresa just showing up at his house, but she insists they have to talk. And that's where Bill gives a lot of information about Sean, about that night, how as a kid he witnessed his mom being murdered, but he didn't exhibit signs of shock, or he didn't shut down. He immediately pointed in a lineup book who it was that killed his mother, and then revealed that it was his father who talked to Sean and told him, "You're wrong, pick somebody else," and never could quite understand that. Teresa kind of has like a new angle of, I know, angle's not, she has a different viewpoint of Sean, thanks to Bill, because Bill is trying to say the boy is just trying to find his mother's killer, right? And it's all that's consumed him for the last 10 years of his life. Sean and Steve show up at Amanda's party, and Sean is in the kitchen. He's sipping on a beer, and then here comes Amanda, and they start talking, right? He's got a little game. He's getting a little repertoire, a little flirty going on with Amanda, and then next, this douche of an asshole, character's name is Bruce, comes in and says, "Hey, can't I talk to my girl?" And just, super douche. Then it transitions to Sean and Steve. Sean's kind of like laid back in the couch. I guess he's had one or two beers, so he's kind of floaty. But Sean, something kind of triggered in Sean, because you're hearing in his head kind of like the playback, what the waitress said. "Oh yeah, we used to call your dad Rocky." And then it flashes back to that night with his mother, and he hears a voice says, "Hey, Rock, what are you doing here?" And it's like, okay, well, you had to have known my dad, because you called him Rock. My dad knew the killer, and he is starting to show, signs of anguish and just anger start to come out. And that's where Amanda walks into the living room where Sean and Steve are, and followed by that douchey asshole Bruce. And Bruce grabs her by the hair, dude. Sean sees this and comes up to Bruce. Is like, so you like to hurt people, right? Huh? You like to hurt people? And Bruce, being the little cocky douche that he is like, well, I'll hurt you. And Sean is just, he's like deflecting blows and slapping him. You know, dodges another swing, comes up and hits him in the solar plexus, and then next he takes another wild swing. He comes up and he just pops him, throat punches him, and then next he grabs Bruce and slings him and slams him down face first into this glass table. Bruce's face is cut up. It's like, whoa, I've seen some fights in high school and at a couple parties, nothing like that myself, but it's wild. Then he delivers a freaking roundhouse kick, just knocks Bruce out, and then he really snaps. Goes to the fireplace, picks up a fire poker, and starts wailing on Bruce's back. I mean, just wailing. Like, another kid comes in, tries to grab him, restrain him, and to his credit, he must have trained up really well, because next Sean takes that freaking poker and just whacks the other kid in the head, turns spinning side kick, kicks him out of the way. Steve finally comes in, pins him. It's like, what's Sean? What are you doing? Are you crazy? Sean says, give me your keys. And, eventually, Steve gives him the keys. Sean's driving Steve's car, but while he's driving, the flashbacks are definitely more prominent, more detailed about that night his mother was killed. And it gets to a point where, Sean he's like seething with rage. You're not sure what his next move is, right? But what we see next in the next shot is Terry, his dad, comes home. The house is like kind of messed up, like someone broke in and was rummaging through it. He goes down to the basement. He finds his son down there, and they start talking. And then Sean just basically starts laying into him like, it was you. You knew the killer. You worked with him to kill mom, to get the insurance, so we can move out of that crappy neighborhood. This is all your fault. And his dad's trying to talk to him like, what are you talking about? Are you nuts? You're serious about me, conspiring to have your mom killed? That's my wife. That's your mom. And there's a lot of, some dialogue back and forth to you're like, Sean may be right, but then his dad might be right, and I'm like really confused right now. What happens next, I am not going to spoil. I want you to. I hope, even though it's brief and a little chopped up, I hope there's enough curiosity that you will end up watching this to find out what happens. The movie's main characters: Sean, Teresa, Gary, Bill, even the criminal Larry. The 6 degrees of separation finally closed the circle. The movie at the end, kind of on purpose, has you starting to think, to what level should someone go to seek, quote, justice? Or is it just pure vengeance? Or is it just simply wrong? Who knows, right? Who knows what the real right answer is? I have some inkling, but you know what? Let's get into those thoughts next. Let me be upfront right now. My next thoughts and what comes out on this video, it's not a affirmation or condoning of one way or another. I'm just simply letting you know my thoughts here. And maybe you think the same, maybe you think I'm crazy, maybe you think completely different. First and foremost, I like the movie. I really did. I give it a 4 out of 5. It has, again, some issues with the editing. Like I said, more specifically, like on the train scene, we see the mother and her family, the kids, come in, and next thing you know, it flashes back and they're sitting in this other car. So there's not a real clean transition between present to past. it'd have been better if they just left that part out and just kind of, I guess, let it play out in real time. One of the other things, more specifically with editing, that I wish they had done a little bit more was between the time he witnessed his mom's demise to quote present day, where he's in high school as a senior. He knows how to speak Mandarin, he knows how to speak Chinese. We understand from his father he's got some basic skills, in hand-to-hand combat, boxing, but he's also got somewhat of a martial arts background. How, when, what could we have learned about Sean? Because his character is really interesting. It's obvious now that he has a lot of trauma. I guess you could even say PTSD about it, because there's a scene in the movie too where he's walking past a mom talking to her son while holding her daughter's hand. He sees it as her completely dressing the young boy down, like, "What did I tell you? I will call your father." When he actually walks away, she's like, "Son, what did I tell you? You're not supposed to hit your sister." Right? Two completely tones, but in his head, you saw what his interpretation of the events were. The kid definitely has some issues. That's where it's kind of, you got to ask the question of, was what he was doing with the drug dealer, with the pimp, drug dealers, then the pimp, and then the homeless man, who obviously himself had mental issues, what he did. Is there some justification? Is there no justification? Is it completely right? Is it completely wrong? Again, I would have liked to seen a little bit more between that gap, because that would have helped answered, gosh, I can't think of a better word to say except compassion, maybe even sympathy for victims as he encounters them. Let me borrow a line from the Addams Family movie. Is it the replacement theory, right? He sees himself in that situation, or saw himself in that situation, or was in that situation. So he's got to do what he's got to do. Now, with the drug dealers, again, this is my personal take. You want to sling poison, you get what's coming to you. Karma. It's going to come around. Hey, whatever. Pimp. Hey, again, karma. But to the extent that Sean took it, let justice kind of handle its, do its due. But then again, the flip side to that is we saw it earlier in the movie, right? Larry's right there and getting ready to go on trial. The prosecution says, let's wait a couple more months. Justice delayed is no justice whatsoever. The homeless man, this is where I kind of took a little bit of issue with it. Instead of saying, again, the drug dealers I get, the pimp I get, the homeless guy. Dude, that was way too far, right? Because again, the homeless man has mental issues. It's obvious, plain as day. He's definitely homeless. He's got nothing, right? To take it to the extreme that you did, and you basically wailed on this guy, probably, shattered his freaking eye socket or whatever. I mean, he brass knuckles will do a number on you. He took it to the extreme. And was it justified? In that case, I couldn't say it. I couldn't say no, or I couldn't say yes, right? The answer was no. It was not the right thing to do. Some of the other decisions that he makes really throw you for a loop. Again, in the little Chinese carryout joint, where he stands up and lets, the proprietor and his wife know, I know what the hell you said. You shouldn't say it. But then he flips the script and says, I'll put a bullet in your head. I mean, that'll leave anybody shook. When you're trying to quell, satiate a situation, or just bring about some kind of resolution, de-escalate, whatever. Well, Sean could de-escalate, but then, man, he escalates like he was Hulk jumping up to the building or something. It was nuts to see. So where some viewers may see Sean as a hero in some respects, and then as a just pure, evil vigilante to an anti-hero, right? I think that's on purpose, right? Because when we go through life, we have to face some of those dilemmas, whether we believe it or not, right? I mean, how many of you have been in a situation where you've seen somebody steal something, you see somebody getting bullied, you see somebody getting harassed. What if it was a family member? What if it was one of your kids, right? These are all questions that you go through. I personally have gone through some things where I can't let things slide. I will have to intervene. And it's kind of, even though it was shot in 2010, released in 2010, good almost any site on the internet, and you will find those videos where something just despicable, disgusting happens to somebody. And the first thing people do is just whip out their phones and they're videoing it. You're not doing anything to help that person in need. Whether, they got what they deserved, but once it gets to a point of going too far, what's happened to society? Again, what if it was one of your friends, one of your kids, one of your family members, right? And you see all these people just standing around. I mean, can you abide by it? Do you have to do something? Wow, it's hard to answer a lot of those questions today for most folks. For me, it's kind of simple, right? Which is, one of the things I've tried to teach my kids as they grow up is, you live honest, you get honest, right? And that means also whether, you come out victorious, unscathed, or you come out with a black eye. When you see wrong, you got to step in. You got to do something. You cannot just be an observant, right? Because otherwise, you either become, you know, the sheep or the shepherd, right? You got to help, or you just be one of the victims eventually down the line because you won't do anything for anybody else. Kind of a rough way to look at it and teach my kids, but at the same time too, I'm proud of them taking those lessons and understanding that, when something's wrong, I got to do something. I got to say something, you know, and that's where I think a lot of it comes in today, right? Outside of my family, in society, right? How did we go from knowing what is right and wrong, right? What's black and white, uh, to everything's now shades of gray. I mean, we've seen it in the news, right? It's a man intervenes, stops an attacker from robbing a lady. Lady sues the Good Samaritan. What? The person obviously did something bad. The police come in, rescue them, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're the bad guys, right? Because they, took action against somebody who was raping another person, and now they're the bad guys. I mean, even to the point of when we trust the system, we've all seen those stories, right? We've all seen those stories where somebody commits a heinous crime, and then next thing you know, they're out in a few months. Everyone has a breaking point. Sean in this movie, his breaking point was at 10 years old when his mom had, was gunned down and right in front of him. He decided apparently then and only then, because they didn't tell us otherwise, that the path forward for him was to get justice the way he sees justice should be received or delivered regardless. It's kind of a reflection as we watch this, at first, and that's the way the movie's kind of set up. At first, again, takes out drug dealers. Most everyone's like, oh, you're a drug dealer? Who cares? Pimp? Okay, you beat his ass, but man, you really had to shoot him? To the homeless person, right? There's degrees to which this movie really starts challenging even, your set of standards or your tolerance for what is acceptable or not. And that's what I liked about this movie, because it helped me understand a little bit more that even though I may see things as black and white in terms of right and wrong, that there are just some folks out there that live in shades of gray. And it's either by choice or because of something that has kind of broken them in one way or another. And how do we remedy that as a society? Because it's not an easy question. It's not an easy diagnosis. It's not an easy thing to capture in the moment, right? The bottom line is, again, in my view, again, because I'm not taking one stance or the other. All I will say is mess with my family. I'm going Sean's route. Um, friends, family, I'm going to step in when you can. Most people are like that, right? But this movie challenges you to really step back, think a little bit about what you just watched. How much do you agree with, and how much should you have agreed with? Well, that brings to a close this episode. Again, 2010's Wonder Boy, uh, written directed by Michael Morrisey, starring Caleb Steinmeyer. I enjoyed the movie. 4 out of 5. It has its flaws, but again, I liked being challenged the way this movie challenged me, and I think it's worth a visit. I was able to watch it. It is for free on Tubi. Just put up with some commercials. Better than paying for streaming. I can dig it. Tubi, by the way, is coming out with some really funny commercials. If you decide you want to check it out, please do. And if you do, come back, leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Love to hear from you. That being said, there are a couple other podcasts that you should be listening to and or watching. And let's start off with my buddies Troy and Brad over at Not a Bomb Podcast. How many of you checked out their Halloween episode with Lalani Kilgore? Man, what an awesome episode. She's awesome. Love her music. She can rock. We got Jose and Mike over at Watch Skip Plus. I think at the time of this recording, a little delayed. They're gonna have a double episode though coming up. First time they've ever done it. So let's see. Let's see if they have the stamina for that. I know they do. I can't wait to hear it. Check it out. Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema with Sam Samurai, Caliber 9 from Outer Space. And I apologize to my buddies Kevin and Matt over at Raiders of the Podcast. I forgot them off the top of my head because I'm like geeking out on Baltimore stuff, Baltimore Comic Con stuff. And of course, Death by DVD. We are in the month of November now. Oh my gosh, 2025 is flying so freaking fast. Gotta start Christmas shopping at the dollar store. In the meantime, again, give them a listen. Let me know what you think. Please, if you enjoy this episode, give us a like, share it out, give us a comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. We do truly appreciate it. But in the meantime, as November comes up, a couple of previews. We're going to be going back to a movie from 1945, I believe, starring a certain Judy Garland. And then we're going to be going back to our childhood days. And we're going to talk a couple animated Thanksgiving specials here. And I'm going to save it for later. But in the meantime, thank you again for stopping by. We truly appreciate it. Hope you're all staying out there, staying safe, and again, be kind to one another, be nice, and we can't wait to see you in the next episode. Y'all take care. Bye.